weekly event where a wider audience can join. Give you a little quick bio on the hosts that are here today. We've got Henry Lopez. He's a serial entrepreneur, small business coach, and host of the top-rated How of Business podcast. A prolific small businessman since purchasing his first business in 1991 and is dedicated to helping others start, run, and grow their small businesses. We've got Vinay Koshi. He's the host of the Predictable B2B podcast and founder of Sproutworth. He provides content creation, content marketing, and blog management solutions and helps business owners, marketing, and sales executives achieve predictable growth by expanding their influence. And finally, I'm Ethan Janney. I'm co-host of the Run With It podcast, which invites 7+ figure entrepreneurs to share business ideas, and the action steps to launch them. I also coach people through ambitious career moves, and I coach founding teams towards Fortune 500 dreams. And without further ado, I will hand it over to Henry to introduce our guest for today.
Great. Thank you, Ethan. This is Henry Lopez. Our guest today, we have a great guest. It's Margie Feltune. Margie, who we've known, all of us have known for quite some time, but she's the co-owner of Interview Connections, and they're the first and leading podcast booking agency. Margie and her business partner, Jessica Rhodes, who we all also know and has been on our shows, they lead an in-house staff of 18 employees in their Rhode Island office and has successfully scaled that agency to 7+ figures. Margie joined the company in 2016 as a contractor. I remember when you were first on the Rock the Podcast show, early days, and then she became an employee in 2017. And in 2018, now she's equal co-owners with Jessica. She has helped to quickly scale the business by designing and implementing systems to increase revenue, streamline operations, but most importantly, to achieve that highest quality experience between the clients that they work with and the shows that they book them on. Margie has taken a creative role with the agency here lately as well, producing content, video, podcast. And as I mentioned, she's co-host along with Jessica of their show, which I love, Rock the Podcast. It's one of those key shows. If you're really going to be a student of podcasting, that's one of those must listen to shows, Rock the Podcast. I've interviewed numerous guests through Interview Connections. They've booked numerous guests on my show, and it's been a pleasure working with Margie and with Jessica. So we were excited to have her as one of our initial guests on this mastermind. Today, we're going to focus on and get her perspective on, as podcasters, being guests on other shows. That is a way that we believe, and in our experience, is a great way, and Margie's going to share some insights because that's what they do. But why should we, as podcasters, consider being a guest on other shows? So with all that, once again, Margie, welcome to the mastermind.
Thank you so much, Henry. Thanks for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Absolutely. Thanks for taking the time. And we're going to learn quite a bit from you today. We're going to have a short amount of time, so I'm going to go through it quickly. But let's get started with the why, Margie. Why should I, as I said at the outset here, as a successful podcaster or even a starting podcasting, why should I think about being a guest on other shows?
That's a great question. So guesting on other shows is a great way to grow your own following and to make important connections with other podcast hosts. So it's as much a virtual networking strategy as it is a strategy to get more audience members for your own show from that audience. So especially if you have a newer show and you're just starting out, it's a great way to get more listeners and to get your name out there. And really, we believe that everyone should be guesting on podcasts and have a podcast, especially if you own a business, to get your thought leadership out there and to really be visible.
So on that point, that last point for a moment, what types of businesses have you found, or maybe from this perspective, types of podcasts, or do you think it applies to everybody, but are there better types of businesses or podcast topics for which being a guest is perhaps better, or do you think everybody can benefit from it?
I do think everyone can benefit from it, but there's definitely businesses where it is just such a no-brainer strategy for getting clients. Specifically service-based businesses who can work with clients virtually, it's a no-brainer because you'll get you'll get clients from it. And if the lifetime value of your clients is, like a reasonable amount, which most coaches, consultants, financial planners, it would be a good amount, that the lifetime value, and they have their clients for a long time and it's high trust. Podcast guesting and having your own podcast is an incredible way to get that type of client. So for service-based businesses who are virtual, it's a no-brainer, but we have, people who don't fit that mold. We have some product-based businesses who are doing an incredible job with podcast guesting and seeing a huge ROI. So it's not just one type of business, but that is the business that it's truly a no-brainer for.
Yeah, makes sense. You and I were chatting before we went live about the stats and some of the stats, and also about making sure we look at a broader view of when we say growing our show. And I know you have some thoughts about that. And I see that Rob just joined us, so he might have some further thoughts later. Rob is with Libsyn, but share some of those thoughts you were sharing with me before we started the show.
Yeah. So I'm so glad Rob is here. The numbers that I have are from Libsyn, of course. And these are as of April 2020. So actually, Rob might have even more updated numbers. But yeah, I think it's really important when we talk about guesting on other shows to grow your show, to be realistic about what we mean, because I would never want someone to go into the strategy, working with us or not, even just DIYing it, and be disappointed that the results weren't what you expected. So if you have a new show, going on other shows, you will grow your audience. And if you only have 50 listeners, it could be pretty significant, because you're likely going to be on a lot of those mid-range shows that have maybe like 100 to a couple thousand downloads per episode, which is more than you currently have. So you probably will see a pretty nice growth in terms of number of listeners. It really is more quality over quantity, though. The people who hear you on a show and then go subscribe to your podcast are people who really like you. So as your show gets bigger and you've got, a few hundred, a few thousand downloads per episode, and even beyond that, you might not see a big spike in the number of downloads your show has when an interview goes live. But the people who do come to you from the audience of that other show are going to be really high quality. And it really depends what you do with your podcast. So if you have a business and you're converting clients from your own show, those are going to be really, really high quality people to be in your audience if they followed you from one show to another. And I wanted to go through these numbers because I think a lot of podcasters feel like their show isn't big enough. And we're not talking about huge audiences here. Podcast audiences are amazing because they're so targeted, they're so engaged, they're the best. They're not huge mass media audiences. So if your show has more than 1,000 downloads per episode, and this is 30 days after it goes live, you're doing better than 80% of the shows out there. And the smallest one, if your show gets more than 123 downloads, you're doing better than half the other shows on Libsyn. So that's 123 downloads per episode. That's not like a crazy huge audience, especially if you're coming from traditional media. But you're in the top 50% of shows with that many downloads per episode on your show. If you have more than 2,900, you're doing better than 90% of the shows out there. And it keeps climbing from that. So if you're doing, over 6,000 downloads, you're in the top 5% of shows.
Yeah.
So that really gives you an idea of the numbers that you'd be looking at on shows that you'd guest on.
Yeah. Two great things I take from that, Margie, is first of all, we get so hung up on the numbers. I know I did when I started my podcast. I was checking them daily, and because that's the only thing we have to measure us by. But the point is, as us going on other shows, the best way I've heard it put, and a lot of this comes from Seth Godin's language about building my tribe. If I can just get one new person that connects with me, that likes what I have to say, that likes and it resonates with them, then that's a win. If I can add one new person to my tribe that now will follow me, it's like you said, that quality over necessarily quantity. And that's one of the things we got to look at. And that, I think, goes to that question also, is any show too small? Should I only be looking at being a guest on the big shows? And I gather your answer to that is they're all equally potentially good. Is that fair?
That is fair. I love that you mentioned Seth Godin, because I love that he talks about finding your minimum viable audience. And that is what this strategy is all about. I agree with you, Henry, that every show you could get an incredible ROI from, especially if you go into it with a great attitude and wanting to deliver value and actually connect with people. We focus primarily on mid-range shows. So they're not shows that are brand new. They have more than 20 episodes. They're consistently publishing. And most of them fall in the, like 100 to a couple thousand downloads per episode. When we say mid-range, that's what we mean. And that's what we mostly focus on with our clients. But a brand new show that hasn't even launched yet, if the host of that show is an incredible connection for our client, that's going to be a good use of time. So I agree that even small shows can be so valuable.
Why do you guys focus on that mid-range? What do you see that delivers in the way of results?
We primarily focus on the mid-range shows, particularly for service-based entrepreneurs who are looking to get clients from the strategy, because it's enough people that they're getting a significant amount of exposure by going on 4 shows per month every month. It's not so big that it's not a targeted enough audience that they wouldn't actually see a true conversion. And the shows aren't so new that, below 20 episodes, we worry that the show might kind of fade out. So we don't want to book them on shows with less than 20 episodes, because if that show were to, get canceled or stop producing, then it wouldn't have been a great use of their time in terms of, growing the audience and that being evergreen.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, let's shift into starting to get ready. If I've never done it before, even though I have my own show, it is a different thing. So I want to start talking about that. What should I do if I've never been a guest on somebody else's show to start to get ready? What do I need?
Well, I would definitely make a one sheet, and that is just a basic branded PDF. You can DIY it, that has a headshot, your bio, and a few suggested topics, and maybe 5 to 8 suggested questions that a host could ask you on an interview. This is really helpful because hosts get a lot of pitches now, and it's really helpful to see at a glance what type of value you can offer their audience. And if they do accept you to be a guest on the show, it's a great resource for the interview, because they have some ideas for questions they could ask you to take the conversation in the direction that would be the most valuable.
So I've started for myself, gone the direction of having a media page on my website as opposed to a one sheet. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I love that. We advise that our clients have both, because especially as you're getting out there on more shows, you're going to start getting a lot of inbound requests. And so having a media page on your website is so important.
Okay.
Requests. And then we also use a media one sheet to pitch.
Okay. All right. All right. So you touched on it. I think the thing that we often don't know how to begin if we're doing it ourselves is, what is that pitch? What is the email? What should I include? And what is an effective way to get on a show? So I'd like to get some of your thoughts without giving away all of the secrets of what should I say to get on a show?
Sure. We are happy to give away all the secrets. We want people using this strategy and pitching themselves well. So the important thing first is to do your research, and you want to make sure that you're finding shows that are a good fit for you and your goals and your target audience, but also a good fit in terms of you have good value to provide on that topic. So it would be a win-win for the host. And once you've got that list of shows, then you're going to go through and reach out. And it's really important that the reach out is personal, and that you show that you took the time to understand what the show is about, what the audience wants, and you say specifically how you can offer value here. So they don't have to do the work of, all right, well, they're an expert in this, I'm not sure how I'm going to relate that to what my show's talking about. If you do all that work for them and show them that you care about them enough to understand what their show's about and listen to it, that's going to be your most successful pitch, even if it's cold and they don't know you.
Yeah, I agree. You made the point. I get at least on a good week 5 inbound pitches unsolicited. And I'll tell you, one of my pet peeves right now, Margie, is the whole, I just listened to your episode with Margie and blah, blah, blah. It's become so cliche now that I kind of ignore that. But what you're saying is the key. Did you take the time to research my show? I'm flipping the tables now. And you show that by what you're pitching me. You're not, I'm a show about business. You're not pitching me someone who is completely unrelated. That means you took no time to look at my show, right?
Yes.
And I think that's what has to come through, and make it, for me as the host, what I look for is, don't make me work. Make it easy for me to make a decision. Yes, this is somebody I want to vet further, or no. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. Because we, as you said, we host Rock the Podcast. It's very niche. It's a show about the podcast guesting strategy. And we get pitches all the time. And it'll be like, hey, I'm an entrepreneur and I just wrote this book. And they don't say anything about what they could offer in terms of guesting on podcasts and that strategy that would be helpful. So we post the examples for our team of like, don't do this.
All right. So a one sheet that summarizes who you are, that has a headshot or a media page or both, show that you've done some research and therefore your topic that you're proposing relates to them. It adds value to their audience. Proposed interview questions and topics. I love getting that. I also like to see that I can readily click on a link to another episode or some kind of content that I can see how Margie speaks. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. And especially as someone who hosts their own show, linking to your show is a great idea.
Okay. What else? What else do you think needs to be included to get considered when I'm pitching myself to a host?
I think everything you just said really is all you need. Have a mic and headphones, which if you're starting a show or have a show, you already do.
Right.
And that's really all there is to it. Being a great guest and really connecting with people, and be self-aware about, if you're brand new and nobody knows you, you just started a show, nobody knows your business, like don't pitch Lewis House. Like it's just being self-aware about which shows you actually have value to bring. You'll get a good success rate with those cold pitches.
Yeah, I agree. By the way, as you're listening, if you have any questions, Ethan is monitoring the chat. So in the chat function, you can post your questions there. He'll interrupt if we think it's appropriate, or certainly we'll address questions at the end. So please be sure to do that. All right, here's where I want to go next, Margie, is that subtle difference between being a host and being a guest. Because I do think there is a difference. I have to play a different role when I'm a guest than I do when I'm a host. I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
They're definitely very different. It is much easier to be a guest than it is to host your own
You think
show.
so? Interesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, because you're doing so much less of the work. And of course, as a guest, you should be making it easy for the host. You should be promoting, you should be doing as much as you can. But even doing all of that, it's the host who's taking on the bulk of the work with the consistency and growing the audience.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, as a host, I'm managing so many different things while also trying to actively listen and guide the conversation. I'm managing time. I'm thinking all those things. As a guest, the thing that I think is subtly different is the host of a podcast, which is different than being a journalist. I need to make sure I position myself because it's my show. The reason I have a show is to position myself as an authority, even when I have a guest. But when I'm a guest, I want to do the same, but I want to make the host shine. He or she is the star. And I think that's part of being an effective guest. What are your thoughts on that?
I totally agree. And that's why you do your research before you pitch. And then also, I always research again before I'm going to be a guest and listen to some episodes, look at the host website, look at their business so that you can set them up, make sure they look good and mention them. When you're talking about a topic that they're an expert on in their business, it's like, hey, I know, Henry, I know you know all about social proof. You're an expert on that. And then go into it. So yeah, that's so important.
Yeah, I agree. Telling stories, but not being too verbose. What other tips like that do you usually prepare someone, especially someone who's new to podcasts? What are some of those other tips besides storytelling, or maybe that's it that you prepare people for?
Definitely storytelling, and just know that you're not going to be that good when you first start. But if you're really doing your best, if you're a good person who wants to serve and provide value, you're still going to see benefits and you're going to get better and better. So it's really important to stick with it. That would be the biggest thing.
Okay. A question that I skipped that I want to go back to is on the outreach rather. if I don't get a response, how persistent should I be? How persistent are you? I know when I get pitched by you guys and I don't respond, which I don't respond to every inbound pitch. I just don't have the time. But I know at least I get at least one reminder. Is that kind of the way you recommend you do it? Or what are your thoughts on that persistent outreach?
That's a great question. And this is something that we've actually, it should change over time as the market changes, in my opinion. So Jess founded this business in 2013. No one else was doing this. Like
Right.
she was pitching people in 2013 and they were like, a pitch? Like hosts had no idea. Obviously, fast forward to now, that's very different. Like you said, Henry, you have a great show. You're getting unsolicited pitches every single week. So we have lowered the amount that we follow up from when we started the business in the beginning. It's continued to go down because we understand that hosts are getting a lot of pitches and you want to have a balance. You do want to follow up because personally, I like when people follow up with me and remind me about something that I'm interested in checking out. So it's that balance of following up enough to say, hey, not sure if you saw this, or to send them another resource that might be helpful, but you don't want to be emailing them every other day till the end of time because they'll lose their minds.
Agreed. That's the way I feel about it. I'm fine with a follow up, but if you keep persisting, I'm going to block you out. Yeah. Mm-hmm. What are hosts? What have you found? We've talked about it a bit from being a guest, but what are hosts looking for in your experience? What are they looking for in a guest?
Well, I think you could answer this even better than I could, but what we found that the hosts that we have good relationships with love is people who are well-spoken, so they know how to talk, they know how to be on a podcast or host a show or speak. They have an interesting topic that's genuinely interesting. They're a real expert in what they do, so they know what they're talking about, and they're not trying to sell. They really want to serve.
Yeah, I would agree with all those. So what other thoughts do you have, and how, going back to the question I asked about when someone new comes to you and they don't have that experience with speaking? Obviously for us as podcasters, hopefully we've overcome that. But again, it is slightly different being a host and being a guest. What are some other tips that come to mind to help you get better at it besides just doing it, right? Because that's the way we learn how to be good hosts. Is our first, if I go back and listen to my first 10, 20, 30 episodes, I cringe, right? I cringe from last week's episode, but how do you help people get over that and get better at it?
I totally cringe too, even now. The biggest thing that actually I find so helpful when you first get started, because you talked about the importance of stories and it being concise. And those two things are so important. And what helped me a lot was to write out my main stories, those stories that you're always going to be telling, like how did you found your business? Those key stories or those client stories that you always share to illustrate an important point. You're not going to read them on the interview. You're not going to memorize them, but the exercise of writing them out will help you cut out the stuff that's unnecessary and really figure out how you want to tell the story so that when someone asks you the question, you're ready. So again, Don't read it and don't memorize it. It's just the exercise of writing it out and figuring what you want in that story.
Yeah. I love that tip. I also do like talking points, or what this leads to, Margie, is one of the things I find effective is like, if I got booked because I'm going to talk about my experience and expertise in customer service, I've got an accompanying download that is my 6 steps to delivering remarkable customer service. So I'll speak to that because I think that I appreciate guests that deliver a concise message that has enough bite-sized pieces that my listener can take away that value, not rambling topics, because I think that people kind of disconnect, right? My stats are showing me that my episodes they used to run 45 minutes to an hour, but my stats were showing a tremendous drop off after about 40 minutes. So I've been trying to tighten up the show. Well, that means I got to have a concise message, and a guest that does that or helps me do that, I really appreciate that as a host.
Yes, that's definitely really important.
All right. So that leads to then I like it. And I think it's great when a guest has some kind of special offer, a download, some kind of lead magnet, something that encourages that action on behalf of the listener. What do you guys do there or recommend?
Yes. So that call to action is not one size fits all. Different calls to action work for different people and different businesses. We've done opt ins, which are great. We now have a call to action to join our free Facebook group where we know it's super valuable. We have free training. So that's what we do now. In the past, we've done straight to booking a call. The most important thing is that you keep it simple and concise. You don't give them like 18 things to do, and that it truly is valuable. It's not salesy, but it's really something that would be helpful for audience members who liked what you said and want more value.
Yeah, that's a great point. Any further thoughts? The challenge for me has always been getting people to take action. We know, at least I've confirmed, that my listeners are on the go. They're in the car, they're in the gym, they're on a walk, what have you. And I find myself being guilty of the same thing. I'll listen to a show doing those things. I'll hear something, but by the time I get home, I've forgotten to take that action. I've been experimenting with a text, so text a message, and that's gotten pretty good traction. Any thoughts on what you guys have experimented with? You said the Facebook page, the call, to get people to take that action and that they don't forget when they get back to their office or wherever they're going?
Totally. And I'm also guilty of forgetting. So, one thing is staying consistent. I mean, we're booking our clients and ourselves on 4 shows a month every month. So, it helps to be able to touch people multiple times. So, maybe they hear you and forget, but then they see you and hear you somewhere else. And they're like, oh, right, this person.
Good point.
I love text opt-ins. Anything mobile is a great idea. If you have your own podcast, which all of you do or will, that's an amazing call to action. If you can convert leads through your podcast, sending listeners to a podcast when they're already on their phone in that same app is awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's worked well for me. All right, great. So we've talked about what to offer. What should I be doing as a good guest after the interview, after the show, and then in particular, after that episode goes live?
Yes, promote like crazy. You should be sharing it everywhere. And it's helpful to not just share it once everywhere, but have someone, and we have people on our team to do this, because when you're doing a lot of interviews and you have a business, it can be a lot. So having a VA or an employee on your team is helpful, but promote it multiple times. Do, Throwback Thursday where you promote appearances you've done before. Again, the more you can promote it, the better for your relationship with the host, for your own self gain, because you're getting more listeners. And then the other thing I do after interviews is if I really connected with the host, I'll like kind of make plans with them to talk again and check in again. And I have a few hosts who I have like standing Zoom calls with. And it's really just fun. Like, they're incredible entrepreneurs. We kind of pick each other's brain and go back and forth. And I'm sure in the future, like, that stuff does, of course, turn into referrals. They'll probably become clients, but it's more than just like the dollar signs of that. It really is fun. And you sort of kind of create like your own mastermind of people who've interviewed you, who you're now talking to and bouncing ideas off of.
Yeah, that's such a great point, Margie, that this mastermind that you're part of here came about that way. I think that's one of the things that being a podcaster and being other shows has done for me as much as anything else, is that network of people, like-minded people that I've been able to connect with. And like you said, you never know where that might go or what that might lead to, but that's a great strategy to really develop that connection. I know when I finish with someone and I feel like I had that connection, I always feel like you said, I should think about saying, let's connect, let's schedule something and chat again soon. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But going back to the question, one of my pet peeves is because I send an email when an episode is live to my guests, and I would say about 50% of it, sometimes I get nothing back, not even an acknowledgement to say, hey, thanks for including me in your show or for hosting me. So at least acknowledge when you do get told that the episode is released, right?
Yeah, I'm horrified to hear that. And I'm now making a note to make sure we talk to all our clients to make sure they're all doing that. Because yes, every communication with the host should be prompt. you're building that relationship all the time before the interview happens, after it happens. You should always be replying. You should always be friendly. You should always be looking at how to serve, because that relationship with the host is one of the most valuable parts of being a guest on shows.
I agree. All right. So I'm an experienced podcaster. I want to go on shows, be a guest. Why should I consider Interview Connections to help me with that?
That's a great question. So the reason I would pick us rather than DIYing is because there's a ton of legwork and you really need to build momentum. It's not a one and done, like I'll do 10 interviews and that'll be it. Like we are consistently doing 4 interviews per month, every month for years and years and years. And that's how you see the benefit. The longer you do it, the more valuable it is. So there's a lot of logistics. There's a lot of research to find shows that are a good fit. There's a lot of outreach. There's a lot of follow-up. There's a lot of tracking. So the legwork alone, but more than that, we also have been doing this for over 7 years. We created this industry. So we've really figured it out, and we want to save people the trial and error of the past 7.5 years and figuring out how to do that. It's really important that the people representing you are legit. We have full-time employees. They're not contractors. We're training them and developing them constantly. And we're able to offer higher quality support to our clients because your reputation and messaging is so important. And then the last thing I would say is we have a great client network. So we have twice per week Zoom calls with our clients so that they have the opportunity to not only ask questions, but to also network with each other, work with each other, become referral partners. So that support is really important too.
It's a bit of a softball question, but do you find that it helps for that inbound pitch to come from a third party? Does it make me appear more professional that it's not me pitching you, but a booking agency pitching me?
Yes, it is better positioning not to pitch yourself, because I don't know any successful entrepreneurs who have time to pitch themselves. And maybe they have a team member in their email pitching them, but it is good positioning to have somebody else pitch you, and they can brag about you in a way that you might not want to brag about yourself.
So even if I do it myself, if I have an assistant or someone else do it on my behalf, you think that's an effective tactic?
Yes, I would say that's more effective for a cold reach out. The only exception would be if it's someone that you already know and it would be okay to reach out and say, hey, I'd love to be on your show. I can give your audience this. In that case, it's good. But for cold pitches, yes.
Yeah. The other advantage that you're bringing is you know how to get to me, right? So you know you have my contact info. You've worked with me and you know what I respond to. So you're providing those clients that access that for me to go and cultivate is going to take a lot more effort.
Yes, we have a lot of intel. And not only that, not only do we know what you like, but we also know which clients in which industries have seen an ROI from your show. So that's insider information that we can share with clients who have a similar target audience, that we know this is going to be a great use of your time. And here's why.
Yeah. Margie, anything I haven't asked you about this topic of as a podcaster, being a guest on shows, anything that I haven't asked you about, you think we should chat about?
No, I think this was great.
Do we have any questions, Ethan?
Well, I don't see any questions specifically what do we have here? We have most recently from Anna Marie Waite, just taken on a PA who she would like to approach podcasters for her, but she worried this is impersonal as it is not directly from her. Any thoughts?
That's a great question. So like we just said, having a third person, like a third party pitch you, is a good idea. Be really careful having a personal assistant or a VA do it, because they are not trained. And a lot of the really bad pitches we get for our show are from people's personal assistant and VA. And if it's really bad, sometimes we'll let the person know, like, hey, just so you know, this went out on your behalf. So it's fine that it's not you pitching yourself directly. That's actually better, but just be really careful that it's someone who knows how to pitch well, who's representing you and your brand.
Well, can you give me an example, not specific, but what makes it bad sometimes? What are they not including or including that makes it a bad pitch?
The bad pitches we get generally are really, really long. They're clearly a copied and pasted template, like nothing has even been changed. They're very focused on like, they did this and this and this, and they have a book coming out and like all this stuff that isn't relevant to what they would add value wise to our show. And it's very clear, like, oh, they want to sell their book.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. And that goes back to what you said earlier, Margie, which I think is, to me, one of the key takeaways. I have to communicate how I'm going to bring value to that host's audience, how I'm going to help their show be better. That's what I have to communicate. It can't just be a sales pitch about my new book or whatever or anything. Otherwise, what's the point, right? If I'm desperate, I might bring you on, but otherwise I won't. And to your point, I've had some that come in that immediately I'm suspect when even the font is different in the email, but that's how clumsy the cut and paste was, right? So those are some of the things you're talking about when you get these bad pitches from a VA that doesn't really know you and doesn't understand how to go about pitching.
yes.
I'm wondering if there's a way to, and I don't know if you do this, I feel like force myself to write a one sentence, at least summary of what their show is or what I like about it. Because I notice, what happens with us is we have a business podcast. So people go, oh, it's a business podcast. And they say, I think I'd be a great guest on your show. And they give us some ideas. But it's clear they don't know what our show focuses on because of the ideas they give. And I think if somebody could just take a minute and, yeah, what is this show about? And write it out, maybe just to even communicate to the other person. I like your show because you X, Y, Z. And then you could follow it up with something more personal for them. I don't know. Do you do anything like that? Or do you think that's a good idea?
I do think that's a good idea. I wouldn't say I like your show unless you truly are like a listener, because you always want to be totally authentic. But what an easy formula, and you can write this down to adapt, is I know your audience of blank is interested in blank. I know your audience of small business owners is interested in learning marketing strategies to help them scale. Most of that information will be in the show description and in the introduction of the podcast. So you don't even have to dive deep to find this out. And some adaptation of that will show me that you understand my show, you understand who my audience is, and you know what they want. And then I'm listening.
Yeah, I love that because it also speaks to my pet peeve of pretending like you love my show when I know you don't. Yeah, you listen to a few seconds of the last episode, great, but everybody can say that. So that's a great technique.
I can read through some of the comments that are here, not necessarily questions, but could be talking points. Rob shared earlier, research and listening to 2 or more episodes helps you as a guest to fit in and provide the most value on the show. Many show hosts have regular format stuff that guests participate in. Prep, create conversations with hosts as a guest. As a guest, it is not an opportunity to give very long answers to dominate the conversation. Also, don't pitch products or services unless host ask for that.
Yeah.
Any comments in any of that?
Yeah. And if I can interject here before you do, Margie and Rob, is I agree with you, because when I'm going to go be a guest, I'm listening for the tone, the approach. Margie always asks this particular question at the end. So I'm prepared, and I'm also tapping into the tone of that particular host. But what are your thoughts, Margie?
Yes. I mean, Rob, you know everything. I totally agree with everything you say about podcasting. You are such an expert on podcasting. I totally agree. And if you're feeling like, how do I have time to listen to 2 episodes of every show I pitch, knowing that I'm not going to get accepted on all of those? Do your preliminary research, listen enough to know you can add value and to understand the show and the audience. And then you can do the rest of your research before you're a guest. That's what I usually do. And then I'll listen to a couple episodes before I go on the show. So I know the tone, I know the questions they always ask, I know what types of things they're interested in.
Yeah, that's a really practical tip. And then Rob's point about short answers, we talked about that. My hardest guest to handle is one that goes on and on and on and on, and I can't get a word in edgewise, right? So you are making it really hard for me as a host to manage my show. It's my show. And so then I have to wrestle control back from you as a guest. So that's such an important point. Give me room to interject, and then I'll let you know if I want to dig deeper on that particular point. Yeah.
Yes. And you're a great host. Like, not every host knows how to dig deeper. So it's that balance of making sure you're giving enough, but not going overboard to kind of set the host up for success and make you both look good.
Great point.
We've
Other
had guests
thoughts?
recently where we want them to give short answers, but they give nice short answers. And we're like 30 minutes in, we're like, okay, I guess we're done. Because, people don't have to talk as much as they think they do. And you get a lot of good information when you keep it concise. Next thing, I'll just give a few more things that Rob added. He was just encouraging Anna. It could be positive to have a VA doing this thing. It's all about the approach. The personal assistant needs to clearly represent you, and has a deep that you have a deep knowledge of that show. And I guess that's great because the VA can you can have them put some time into having a deep knowledge of that show and give you the cliff notes on it. And you could say, okay, yeah, that's right. That's a great show for me. That's how we're going to do it. Next thing he said, or getting pitched to be a guest on a show that you stopped producing like 10 years ago. What is that? What is that, Rob?
Like,
you were pitched to be on a show that you stopped producing 10 years ago and they didn't realize it.
He needs to.
Are you muted?
Himself.
Oh, did I make it? Sorry, I made it impossible for you to unmute yourself.
Let Rob speak for himself.
Okay, you're cool, Rob. You can unmute yourself now.
There he is.
Yeah, I stopped doing a radio show that I started back in '99, back in 2006, and I still get pitched to be a guest, for guests to be on my nationally syndicated radio show, and that I finished doing 14 years ago. So there's some old, a lot of these PR companies put you on databases, and then they send out these pre-formatted guest request emails out, and that's a real problem. And I immediately delete them, or I reply back to them with a real snarky comment saying, you guys might want to do a little more research before you pitch a show. Yeah.
I'll cut in here and say we've got about 15 minutes left, and
right.
And I'm sharing a couple of things in the chat. One is a feedback form. So for those of you that are here for the first time, or maybe you've been here before, we'd like to get your feedback as we continue to adapt this show, things we can improve upon, things that you like. Also encourage you to register for next week's session, which is the Eventbrite link there. That's the first link. And if you join next week, we're going to have some really cool stuff. We're going to have a few downloads, and for example, a checklist for guesting on other podcasts, a tutorial on writing outreach emails, tips on finding and contacting the host that might be, and the podcast that might be a good fit for you. And then also what we'd like to do is hold you accountable to some action steps, if you don't mind, if you think that would be useful for you. So I've come up with a few here, and we can narrow it down by the end if we want to. But I think that I would think a great action step would be to make that list of maybe 5 to 10 other podcasts where, you really put some time and you say you actually are going to resonate with that podcast host. And after that, I can think of a few more things. I like the idea of connecting with a host because you want to connect with that host, whether or not that appearance is going to have a lot of downloads or not. So I like the idea of at least one of those on that list. It might be someone who you think could be quite accessible, but is in your niche, so that you can build a relationship with them and have that episode outreach be a win-win, no matter what. And I think that beyond that, I like to keep it simple. So I always have those be the major things, but if you want extra credit, start to make a one sheet or a media page on your website that demonstrates who you are and can show the value that you bring to the equation when you're going to be a guest on a podcast. I think those would be good action steps. And if you want to be held accountable to that, or if you want to just check in and say, hey, I didn't do it, but I wonder why, we'll be here next week and you can join us, and we'll keep going on this topic. Sorry, I cut you off about a minute ago, Henry, but was there something?
Oh, no, that's fantastic. That's where we needed to segue next. Yeah, that last one is one that Margie had recommended before we started recording, to start working on the copy for your one sheet. So that's a great action item. All right, so let's segue into the panel discussion on that. We'll keep Margie with us until the 3:00 hour, or 3:00 Eastern anyway. But I'll turn it back over to you, Ethan.
Yeah, and at this point, what we like to do, we open it up a little bit to your questions and comments in the chat. For a little bit, we'll just see if any of our regular hosts here, we've got Rob and Vinay and Henry, if we have anything we want to throw out there or throw into the equation. And then after that, we'll visit some of the comments and questions that other people bring in, and maybe even encourage you to chime in. Just go ahead and speak up. For the time being, I had a question that I just, or thought that I just wanted to throw out there. And that is, you touched upon it briefly, but kind of like, how high do you want to reach? Because, for me to actually be excited about being on a show, I want to connect and listen to it even, right? I want to connect with a show that I really like, and I love the content, but okay, I can't go pitch myself to be on How I Built This with Guy Raz or something like that, right? I've got to find an intermediate level where it's a good show. I really like it, but it also seems accessible for me. Do you have any thoughts on how to find that happy medium?
Yeah, I think it's about being self-aware. And it's not to say that you can't have those wish list shows. We absolutely have clients come to us with wish list shows. And if they're a good fit for the show and the content is relevant, we will pitch them. Just knowing that, a lower percentage of people get accepted for shows like that when they usually pick their own guests and stuff like that. I would just be self-aware, because you should still like the show. You should still resonate with the host and with the topic. You won't connect with every host equally. Some people you'll be more connected with, but definitely finding shows that you're excited to be on, that you like talking about the topics and like the host, that's important. But also being self-aware about, how well known you are, what you have to offer, so that you're reaching out to shows that aren't, don't pitch Joe Rogan or something like that.
I'll just throw out a point too. I never turned down an offer to be on somebody's podcast.
I love that.
Just in a general sense. I mean, every podcast has value. It could be, because that podcaster may be just getting started, and who knows what they could grow into be. And if I can help them get there, and if I can learn something from them, I mean, it's all a valuable conversation. So I've never turned down being a guest on any podcast my entire career. So, yeah.
I don't think I have either, but it's a point that you made, Ethan. What I do when I'm vetting a guest, first and foremost, is, do I think I want to have a conversation with that person? But same as Rob, I don't believe I've turned down any invitation yet.
Which is great to know that that's your filter, Henry, because some people might not have that filter. Oh, they're going to bring a lot of attention, or, whatever. Hey, maybe I don't want to talk to that person.
I mean, don't get me wrong. When I was starting out, anybody who wanted to be on got on, right? Because that was the nature of the position that I was in. But I'm fortunate now that I can be a little bit more picky, and beyond, is it relevant? That's one of the things I'm doing when I'm researching that person is, do I think I can have a good conversation with Ethan? And that, if I don't feel that, I don't usually book it.
To follow up with what you said, Rob, I didn't know that, and that's really interesting. And I know I've heard you talk quite a bit about how you see in the podcasting space that authenticity is such a, important ingredient. And I think that shows, how authentic you are, how authentically you want to just get in touch with people and help them succeed. Do you have any topics, any thoughts about authenticity and how to bring that into the equation? I don't know if it's a formula to put out there, but I thought you might have something interesting to say.
I don't know that it could be seen as a formula per se. I just think it's just a genuine interest in others and learning. I think it's the big thing that I learned from doing my radio show for 6 years, is just connecting with so many different people, and how that helped me with my own career. I mean, one thing that, there's two sides of this equation, right? There's the host, and then there's the guest, and there's a value equation there that has to strike a balance. and trying to get on. I mean, I've been on big nationally syndicated radio shows before, on other people's shows and stuff, but I tend to enjoy the smaller shows more. The big syndicated guys, I mean, sure, it can drive some attention to you, or the big podcast, but those, I don't know. I would love to be on more of those type of shows, but I also think that those shows tend to be a little pickier on their guests. I know, as I think about bringing guests onto the show that I do today, the new media show, I'm very strategic in my guest strategy, and I think that more podcasters need to be like that, right? I do feel a little bit concerned sometimes with some of the invites that I get from some shows that maybe I'm not going to bring enough value to their show because of their particular topic area that they have. You know, I spent a year working with Margie on this whole project, right? And she would funnel shows to me on a monthly basis for a year, and I learned a lot about that process. You know, she was very helpful in that process of me trying to understand how to be on 4 shows a month or 6 shows a month. I mean, today I'm on probably 6 to 8 shows every month, just organically. But I also wonder sometimes as a guest what value I bring to a podcast too, and that's probably as far as outreach. That's where I'm a little bit more evaluating that. I don't want to get on a show just to get on a show. I want there to be a good connection there.
Thanks for sharing that. Just a quick follow-up, and then of course, at this point, I've given access for anybody to unmute themselves, so you can either put comments or questions in the chat. We got a small group here anyways. Tom, I see, is here, Maria's here, and Anna. Feel free to speak up or interject. But is there a point where I go too far? I do find, like, on some podcasts I want to go on, I just want to find out a lot more about the host. You know, I kind of want to be their kind of personal. I do coaching, so it's almost like I want to be the personal coach. Like, can you go too far in sort of directing the conversation towards the host of the podcast as opposed to staying on some specific topic? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I can create a little bit of thought on that. I'm a firm believer in the host being the host, right? The host needs to lead, and a guest is additive, not a replacement. And I believe that audiences tune in to the show, and I've seen this firsthand with the 11 years that I've done the show that I do, is that our audience on that show is larger when it's just the 2 co-hosts talking than it is when I add a guest. So people tune in to hear the guests, and you know, if you bring on a guest, that guest shouldn't replace you, because that's oftentimes what that audience comes back to that show to hear, is the host. That's who they connect with the most. So I think you have to keep that dynamic in mind too.
That's important. And I'm imagining that what it is that the host brings is they've got that connection, that specific perspective, that whoever that listener is, they go, hey, that perspective is the one that I want to hear from, and I want to know how they're thinking about things.
Yeah, but Margie, it's a balance though, right? Because I'm sure you're coaching and teaching people to do that, to make the host is the host, the host is the star. But there's a reason I'm going on as a guest, right? Mm-hmm. So what are your thoughts on balancing those 2 things that we've talked about here?
Yeah, I would say you're going on to add value. And so you should be queued up with actionable stuff that listeners can take and get a result from, and good stories that will help stuff stick in their mind. I would be careful with wanting to coach the host, because what we talked about earlier is it's so important to make the host look good. And not every host would be comfortable being coached in front of their audience. The positioning of that might not be good for them. So what would be effective there is really, like Rob said, let the host, be a great guest and bring a ton of value, and then stay on with them after the recording if they have a couple minutes, or schedule a follow-up call to dive deeper into who they are and what they're doing and potential opportunities or ways that you could support them.
That's great.
Hey, can I just get something in quickly before we go? I know we've only got a couple of minutes. Is that all right?
Go for it. Yes.
Rob, I was really relating to what you were saying just now about keeping things really personal. And I did a radio show for 5 years, and I had interviewed a couple of like best-selling authors, and they were a bit like you. They were just so down to earth, and they would come on the smaller shows. But one thing that I've really feared is I'll stay small, because I'm so into the personal side of it, and I do this because I just love it, and I love talking to people, I love meeting people, that it actually scares me of growing it bigger. And although obviously I'm at a point now where I really want to, hence why I'm here, there is that sort of nervousness that I'm going to lose that personal side to it. Have you got any thoughts on that, anyone?
I definitely do, and I'll let Rob answer as well. Sorry to jump in here, but I heard this from a great interviewer. I can't remember the gentleman's name, radio person with a large audience. And he said that the approach that he always took well into his career is this: to speak and to conduct his show as if he was speaking to one person.
Right.
You are speaking to one person in your mind, and you're connecting with that one person in your mind. And the way that I've applied that is I try to minimize when I say, Ethan, will you explain that for my audience? No, I try to say, can you explain that to me? Because I'm going to hope that you're listening to my show, because like we've talked about, you've connected with me, but I'm never going to position it as if my audience who doesn't know any better, can you explain it to them? We're having a conversation, and I keep it to that level. And I think that'll help. Rob, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think using more singular reference terms in your podcast, I think is the key to giving that impression, right? Using, referential terms like you and thank you for listening, and not doing the we thing, right? Or all my audience, those kind of statements. I hear a lot of broadcasters say a lot of, because they're thinking broadcast, right? Well, podcasting is a one-to-one medium, and sure, you can have many one-to-one relationships, but I think that's the key. Is that it's about you. It's like you sitting and talking to someone at Starbucks one-on-one. That's how I think of podcasting, and that's why I think that's how you can keep that personal element in your show, is if you have that mentality.
Let me interject right quick. I know Margie might have a time limit here. Margie Feltune with Interview Connections. Just want to thank you again for joining us. And where should we go to learn more about Interview Connections?
Thank you so much for having me. Our website is interviewconnections.com, and the best place to actually connect with us and get more content on implementing podcast guesting is our free Facebook group, interviewconnections.com/group.
Great. Thank you, Margie. Ethan, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay. Yeah. The hour, we actually packed a lot in there. The hour went by quick, but we packed a lot in. So the links are in the chat there. So your feedback is really great. We appreciate that. And join us next week. I'll send out an email to the people who signed up, just reiterating what those action steps might be. We could follow up with them and help out next week as we talk about our progress making those things. Thank you so much for Anna. I hope you've got enough time to have your question. It was really great to have you participate. We really appreciate it. Okay, so without further ado, maybe the guests can jump off. We're gonna hang out here for a few minutes. I'll log us off of Facebook and YouTube, and we'll just do a wrap up among the hosts of the show here. So thank you all very much for joining, and we'll talk to you again soon. And let me get to getting us off the internet.